This video may contain what could be considered attorney advertising under the rules of your state. This video is for information purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. If you have a legal problem, it's vital for you to seek out and talk to a licensed attorney for advice. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Chris Simmons, attorney at law, and today we're going to talk about free speech, specifically hate speech. So, as this is about hate speech, I will use highly offensive language in this video to accurately describe exactly what was said in court cases. So, you've been warned. So, before we explore anything about hate speech, first we need to know what is hate speech, and that is the first huge problem we run into. There is no unified definition of hate speech. My definition is going to be different from yours and will certainly be different from the actual legal definitions. But let's start with my own definition. Disparaging, hateful, or discriminatory speech made toward a person or group of people based on an attribute like race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, or some other characteristic. Agree with my definition or not, it falls close to what is recognized as hate speech, but it fails on two fronts in American jurisprudence right away: overbreadth and vagueness. Why is this? Well, my definition doesn't define what hateful, disparaging, or discriminatory speech is, and thus it is vague. We can make guesses, we can make educated, well-qualified guesses, but who exactly defines what is considered discriminatory or hateful? What is discriminatory to one person may not be to another person. My definition also covers a lot of speech that may not traditionally be called hate speech. For instance, it is conceivable that criticism of political opinions could be considered hate speech under my definition. My definition would chill otherwise legitimate speech because it is overly broad. The vagueness and overbreadth doctrines are related, and they protect American free speech from laws that are not narrowly tailored. That is also why, when judging whether something is hate speech, context is key. But that's not the end of my definition's conflict with American free speech law. The Supreme Court has had a variety of decisions, all reinforcing that in America, there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. Why not, though? Well, the act of the government banning hate speech would be based on both content and viewpoint. If we ban disparaging, hateful, or discriminatory speech, we are banning an entire genre of speech. And while we can do so in a non-public or limited public forum, that is still overly broad and vague. When we allow positive speech about a race, religion, sex, or any other characteristic, but not the hateful speech about them, then we have banned viewpoints, a wholly unconstitutional act. But that's just my definition. What about actual hate speech laws that have been tried in the United States? The fact that hate speech is protected speech has been made clear time and time again. In Brandenburg v. Ohio, Ohio arrested a KKK leader for advocating violence against, quote, niggers and Jews. The Supreme Court found the statute that he was arrested under was unconstitutional because speech can't be banned unless the speech would incite imminent lawless action. That's the test for incitement. In Nationalist Socialist Party of America versus Village of Skokie, Nazis wanted to march through Skokie, Illinois, a town filled with Holocaust survivors. Chicago attempted to ban this by requiring the Nazis to pay a bond, and by banning political demonstrations in the park the Nazis planned to march to. The Supreme Court found that displaying the swastika, even to Holocaust survivors, did not amount to fighting words. Displaying the swastika, a symbol that is universally recognized as a hate symbol, is protected speech. Related, later in RAV versus City of St. Paul, teenagers were arrested under a local ordinance for burning a cross in an African American family's yard. The local ordinance banned symbols, objects, characterizations, and graffiti, such as burning a cross or the Nazi swastika. The Supreme Court made the distinction that the government cannot ban fighting words based on viewpoint. Essentially, the ideas themselves cannot be banned, only the method in which they are delivered. Recently, in Snyder v. Phelps, the Westboro Baptist Church was allowed to protest military funerals based on their homophobic beliefs. They held signs saying, "America is doomed, you're going to hell, Semper Fi fags, and thank God for dead soldiers," just to name a few. The gay father of the dead Marines sued for intentional infliction of emotional distress, but the Supreme Court ruled, again, that their hate speech is protected and cannot be banned on public property. Time and time again, the Supreme Court has ruled that hate speech is protected speech, but if that was the full controversy, this would be open and shut. What about in the private realm, where the First Amendment has no bearing? This is where the biggest arguments are. Should social media platforms like Twitter or YouTube ban people for hate speech? Should we out those that engage in hate speech to the public? Should people lose their jobs for engaging in hate speech? Should violence be used against those people who spew hate speech? These are hard questions, and the answer to them will vary wildly from person to person. It is a societal discussion rather than a legal or political one, so let's go through these one by one. Let me make this clear. What I say from here on out are my personal views and the rationale for them. You may disagree with me, but that's where we can discuss things. Additionally, from here on out, when I say free speech, I don't mean the legal definition, but rather what we as a society often colloquially refer to as freedom of speech. Remember, the First Amendment has no bearing on private individuals and entities and the interactions between them. My entire stance can be summed up succinctly as freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences. The words and actions you take reflect on you, and thus, in the private realm, there can be consequences. If someone uses hate speech, other people do not have to associate with that person. To require others to do so is to violate their own free speech, but my views are a bit more nuanced than that. Because the question shouldn't be, can a private citizen do these things, but should they? Should Twitter, YouTube, or other social media platforms ban people for hate speech? My answer is actually no. Because banning a type of speech creates the problem where any speech that is not banned is tacitly endorsed by the website. For instance, when websites crack down and ban Nazis based on hate speech from their platform, but continue to allow KKK members on it, there is a tacit endorsement of the KKK if they weren't banned. Banning for threats or harassment is different, but banning based on hate speech creates this problem. But let's reframe the question. Should Twitter, YouTube, or social media be forced to continue to be a platform for people who spew hate speech? The answer here is also no. If we forced private companies to be platforms for hate speech, we violate the free speech of the owners of those platforms, whether they be a single person or a group of shareholders. For me, I don't value this free speech of one person over another. Thus, there has to be a balancing act on this. If Twitter bans Nazis, they run the risk of tacitly endorsing other hate speech they don't want to ban. If they don't ban any speech and allow everything, they risk becoming a platform known for hate speech. This can be seen with sites that set themselves up to be alternatives to platforms like Twitter and who advertise themselves as putting free speech ahead of everything. Not only are they generally unsuccessful, the lack of moderation tends to attract those who want to engage in hate speech, and these alternatives get known for the hate speech rather than the free speech guarantee. Businesses have to make these decisions. But to deprive them of the decision and force them to be a platform would violate the very free speech of the people running the businesses. The solution is rather simple, though. If you don't agree with how a business enforces its free speech policies, don't use the platform and find an alternative. If no alternative exists, find a group of like-minded individuals and create one. If people don't like how a business conducts itself, there should be a market for the alternative. But should we out those that engage in hate speech? Here, I think we have to make a distinction on whether the speech takes place and take context into account. If someone makes hateful comments in private, no, I don't think we should out those people. To do so would break every trust we have in society and make people afraid to say things even in a private setting. If it's in private, challenge to speak or stop talking to that person. You don't have to listen to the person, but I don't agree with outing people for private views. At least not if they aren't an elected politician or someone who makes decisions that affect a huge amount of people. My answer changes when the speech is in public, such as at a protest, a rally, or even on public social media. So why the difference? The expectation of privacy. When someone engages in hate speech in public for all to see, they have brought their speech to the court of public opinion, and the public has every right to know what the person believes. There is no privacy concern here, and when we bring speech to the court of public opinion, we need to be prepared to defend it. Two reasons for this. One, if the general consensus of the public is that the type of speech is regarded as hate speech, then the general public will react to it by shunning that speech and making it known it is not acceptable in our society. Even if the speech is not considered hate speech by the public, certain individuals may not want to associate with that person based on it, and it is their right to know if they want to know. Second, any speech or idea worth defending should be able to be defended. It should be able to beat back or at least have a reasonable explanation for counter arguments. If an idea can't stand up to criticism and scrutiny, then it's a bad idea. Essentially, you don't get to be a weekend Nazi. If you engage in hate speech in public without anonymity, then you must be prepared to stand by that speech all the time, not just when it's convenient for you. But there's a problem with outing people. It risks forcing people with these views underground and to the darkest recesses of the internet. They essentially retreat into an echo chamber that radicalizes them. It creates a wound that festers until someone pulls the bandage off and makes it safe for the people with these views to come forth publicly. The problem is exacerbated by the next question. Should people lose their jobs based on their use of hate speech? Just like with businesses being a platform, I don't think that we should force a business to continue to employ people who engage in hate speech publicly. Just as I don't think people should be outed for private speech, I don't think a business should fire a person for private speech. But for public speech, the business either keeps the worker or tacitly or expressly endorses the speech, which could cause people to stop using that business. Or they can fire the person and denounce that type of speech. It is a business decision, and one that we should not restrict businesses from making in the name of free speech. To do so would violate the free speech of the business owner. Actions have consequences, and those consequences can mean being fired. If no one wants to espouse public hate speech, they must be prepared for those consequences. The problem again is that this may force people underground. The echo chamber can radicalize people, and without a job, radicalized people become violent and extreme. This can be further exacerbated by our final question. Should we use violence against those who espouse hate speech? At my core, I'm a peaceful and nonviolent person, and I don't think we should use violence against those who engage in hate speech, but not because of my nonviolent nature. Actually, I completely understand the desire to punch a Nazi in the face. The argument is actually extremely simple to make. In order for a white nationalist to create a white ethno-state, there is an intrinsic violence that will be involved in that, because they will have to find a way to get rid of minorities, and most minorities will not leave peacefully. There is an implied threat of violence in hate speech, and the use of violence could be seen as self-defense under certain arguments. And while that argument will probably never hold up in court, it does on a societal level. And this argument can be mimicked regardless of the class of people that hate speech is directed against. My reasoning for not engaging in violence is based on sympathy. Not for the person spewing hate speech, but for general public opinion. When a person uses violence against someone for simply speaking, it creates a narrative that the person using violence is the violent one, not the person speaking, no matter how vile the speech. It creates sympathy for the person who was acted on. Every time someone uses violence against someone espousing hate speech, the arguments that the side fighting hate speech makes become weaker. Should we feel bad for the person who is spraying hate speech? Probably not. Again, context matters. If someone is killed for their speech, that's horrific. If someone is punched in the face, we can have absolutely no sympathy for that person. They face the consequences, but those consequences hurt the counter-arguments. Hate speech is rarely, if ever, based on facts or logic that can be defended from criticism. Even in the cases where it might be, the very nature of hate speech means moral and ethical arguments can overcome the hate speech. When we engage in violence first, instead of in self-defense or under threat of imminent violence, then we damage our moral position and garner sympathy for the person engaging in hate speech. You don't have to be tolerant of intolerance. To do so would cause the fall of society, but you can't use violence as a first resort. You have to fight speech with speech. Additionally, when we use violence against these people, it drives them further into their echo chambers and further underground. To quote Yoda,
"Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering."
That's exactly what can happen within these echo chambers. The best way to combat this is to engage the ideas in the open. The treatment for hate speech isn't placing bandages over the wound constantly, but exposing the ideas to sunlight. We should allow these people to speak in public, but we should also challenge them or ignore them, because that's the overarching theme. We can stand on our soapboxes all day, but no one can be forced to listen to us. No one can be forced to take our ideas seriously, and everyone can challenge us. As always, I'll see you in the next video.